Hello everyone. This is the last learning objective of week 5. When we use Markowitz portfolio selection in order to come up with the optimal risky portfolio, and it seems to be that this particular approach provides a magic bullet that all investors should follow. If that were the case, then the theory to hold, it should suggest that every investor simply just hold the same portfolio. But the question is why all investors don't just hold the same portfolio. Well, there is a few good reasons, and there are some problems with the optimal risky portfolios. In this learning objective, we explored those problems. First of all, so-called optimal risky portfolios are static for a specific sample period. That is, the model with portfolio selection is a one-period lock. It is valid for one period ahead, but we know that investors tend to frequently evaluate their portfolios across time. That being the case, the investor would have to change their selections of the portfolio at each time interval. They would have to dynamically adjust the portfolios across time, and we know that that could include transaction cost. However, a really big issue with respect to portfolio selection using this Markowitz portfolio model is that it assumes models of risk and expected returns are valid. So we know that when we calculate efficient frontier, we make assumption that we know expected return. We use CAPM for doing so, and we use historical values of a standard deviation of returns as a measure of expected future returns. These assumptions has problems. First of all, in terms of risk, while we assume that this is constant across time, we in fact know that variances and covariances are not constant. Variances and covariances vary across time. For example, stocks tend to be more correlated during periods of financial crisis, and they tend to less correlated during normal market state. So diversification actually does not work during the financial crisis when in fact we need it more. So there is a flaw with this assumption that variance is a constant across time. Same goes here to expected rate of return. We are using the capital asset pricing model to come up with that measure. But there is a whole lot of empirical evidence that shows us that the CAPM does not fully explain all variation in stock returns. So because of the empirical failing of the CAPM, we know that we are actually using flawed inputs in terms of expected return calculation. Hence, we are at risk of falling in, garbage out problem. That is, we can have a model that is valid, but if we are using data that is flawed in terms of estimating that model, well, the apple itself will be flawed. In fact, another issue potentially would happen is that the CAPM assumes that all variation in expected returns can be explained by one single factor, and that one single factor is a systematic risk or beta factor. However, there is now a huge emergence of evidence that suggests that there are a range of additional risk factors that might also explain returns. They include things like size factor, a value factor, and a momentum factor. It's important to note that if there are multiple factors that can explain returns, potentially what we can do is we can come up with better estimations of expected returns value beyond what we simply find out using CAPM. So while at face value the portfolio selection model is theoretically appealing, it appears to be a valuable way for investor to come up with the optimal security selection decision. However, there are some caveats and limitations that also need to be considered. This is an approach that should be used by investors who believe markets are highly efficient, because in that case, you would likely not believe that there are these additional factors that explain returns. And you would think that the CAPM is more likely the optimal model in order to explain expected returns. In the subsequent learning objectives in coming weeks, we will explain the other ways that we can also look at for measuring expected returns across multiple dimensions that include these additional factors that we talked about from empirical evidence, and we will see how these discussion or these theoretical items can be embedded in our security selection decision. That's the end of this learning objective. Thank you.